The rain was coming down in sheets the night everything fell apart. Manhattan's skyline shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexander Hale's penthouse, but the man standing there saw none of its beauty. His reflection stared back, sharp suit, colder eyes, the image of a man who had built an empire out of steel and ambition, yet could not hold on to the only thing that had ever made him feel whole. He had been waiting for Lena for over an hour. She was never late, not once in the 3 years they had been together. It wasn't just that she respected his time, it was that she cared. That's who she was, warm, considerate, thoughtful in ways Alexander had never been taught to be. And maybe that's why the knot in his chest had begun to tighten when the clock passed 8, then 8:30, then 9. When the elevator finally chimed and he saw her step out, drenched from the rain and flushed with breathless energy, something ugly was already simmering inside him. But it wasn't until he noticed the man following her out, tall, smiling, his hand briefly brushing the small of her back, that the simmer exploded into fire. "Who the hell is he?" Alexander's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Lena blinked, startled by the venom in his tone. "That's Daniel. I told you about him. We were finalizing the contract for the gallery expansion." "Finalizing the contract?" His laugh was bitter, hollow. "That's what they're calling it now?" Her expression shifted, confusion giving way to hurt. "What are you implying?" He took a step closer, his jaw tight, his words sharp. "I saw the way he looked at you, the way you let him touch you. How long has this been going on, Lena? How long have you been playing me?" Her breath caught. "Alexander, stop! You're twisting this into something it isn't. Daniel is my business partner and my oldest friend. You know that." "Oldest friend?" He spat the words like they were poison. "And yet you never seem that happy to see me. You never smile like that with me. Maybe I was just a stepping stone, the billionaire who paid for your dreams until you could trade up." The accusation landed like a slap. Lena's heart hammered in her chest, but not from guilt, from disbelief, from the sting of being reduced to a caricature of greed in the eyes of the man she loved. "I built my gallery from nothing," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Before you, before your money, I was already building something that mattered. I never needed you to save me. I only ever wanted you to trust me." But trust was a foreign language to Alexander. Years of abandonment had taught him that betrayal was inevitable, that love was a transaction waiting to collapse. He'd built his fortune by controlling everything, deals, markets, people, and now the thought of losing control over her terrified him more than he could admit. So he struck the only way he knew how. "Spare me the speeches," he snapped. "I see it now. All of this, us. It was just about what I could give you." Lena stared at him for a long, heavy moment. The rain hammered against the glass, thunder rolled over the city, and somewhere deep inside her, something broke. She had stood by him when no one else did, seen softness beneath his armor, believed in the man behind the money. But she would not beg for trust she had already earned. "If that's what you truly believe," she said quietly, "then there's nothing left to fight for." Her heels clicked softly on the marble as she turned and walked toward the door. He didn't stop her. Pride pinned his feet to the floor even as panic clawed at his chest. The elevator doors closed behind her, sealing the silence that followed. It was only then, in the hollow echo of his own anger, that Alexander realized he hadn't just pushed Lena away, he had driven her out of his life. And what he didn't know, what would haunt him in the years to come, was that Lena Carter had walked out of his penthouse that night carrying more than heartbreak. Hidden beneath the storm of betrayal and rage was a secret growing inside her that would one day make him question everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and the life they could have had together. The weeks that followed felt like a lifetime stretched thin. Alexander Hale moved through his days with the precision of a man who had built his empire from the ground up, yet every action felt empty now. The boardrooms still echoed with applause when he entered, his name still commanded respect in headlines, His signature still made investors billions, but none of it silenced the one question that haunted him in every quiet moment. Why did she leave so easily? He had told himself 1,000 stories to justify it, that she was guilty, that she had been using him, that he was better off without her. But none of those stories held up against the memory of her face the night she walked away. There had been no guilt in her eyes, only heartbreak. And heartbreak, he knew, didn't belong to someone who had been scheming. It belonged to someone who had been betrayed. The first time he returned to her gallery, it was almost an accident. He was supposed to meet a client across the street, but something pulled him toward the glass doors where her name was still etched in elegant silver letters. The place was alive, vibrant, filled with art that pulsed with emotion and vision. She had built this from nothing, he remembered. Every painting on the wall was a piece of her soul, every sculpture a reflection of her heart. But she wasn't there. A young assistant told him Lena had taken a sabbatical and moved out of the city a month ago. No forwarding address, no phone number, just gone. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander felt powerless. He had built companies across continents, crushed rivals with a single call, rewritten markets with his decisions. But he couldn't find the woman he loved, the woman he had driven away with his own hands. Nights became unbearable. He would wake in the middle of them, reaching for a presence that wasn't there. He tried to bury himself in work, to drown out the ache with acquisitions and expansion plans. But no matter how many zeros he added to his net worth, the emptiness in his chest only grew heavier. And then came the letter. It arrived without a return address, delivered to his office by regular mail, something no one had done in years. The handwriting was unmistakable, delicate, elegant, hers. Inside was a single page, nothing more. You taught me what love feels like, and what betrayal does to it. I hope one day you learn the difference between anger and truth. Until then, this is goodbye. No signature. She didn't need one. Alexander stared at the letter for hours, reading it over and over until the words carved themselves into his memory. Betrayal. Truth. Goodbye. It was the first time he understood that she hadn't left because she stopped loving him. She had left because love alone wasn't enough to survive his anger. The next morning, something inside him shifted. He canceled his meetings. He postponed a billion-dollar merger. And for the first time in years, he walked away from his empire to chase something he couldn't buy. His search for Lena became an obsession. He hired investigators, called mutual acquaintances, even reached out to her childhood friends, people he had dismissed as unimportant before. Every lead turned cold. Every trail ended in silence. Yet, each dead end only fueled his determination. And then, one late evening, a breakthrough. An investigator called with a clue so small it was almost me. Anningless, a purchase receipt for art supplies from a small coastal town 3 states away. The name on the account was unfamiliar, but the handwriting on the order form was not. Alexander didn't think twice. He boarded his private jet before dawn and flew to the town himself. The streets were narrow, quiet, lined with bookstores and coffee shops. It was the kind of place Lena had once described as her dream. A town where no one cared about bank accounts or boardroom power. He found the shop easily. It was small, tucked between a bakery and a second-hand bookstore. And there, through the rain-speckled window, he saw her. Lena Carter. The woman he had lost. The woman he had broken. She was laughing, a soft, unguarded sound he hadn't heard in years, as she helped a group of children paint on canvases. She looked peaceful, lighter, whole. And then he saw something that made his heart stop. A little boy, no older than 2, toddled toward her, calling her name with the innocent certainty only children have. She lifted him into her arms with practiced ease, pressing a kiss to his dark hair before setting him on her hip. The boy's eyes, green, piercing, unmistakable, were his. Alexander stumbled back from the window, his breath caught somewhere between disbelief and heartbreak. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. And yet, every instinct told him the truth. She hadn't just walked away from him. She had walked away carrying a piece of him with her. And now, for the first time since she left, Alexander knew that this story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The wind off the ocean carried a bite of winter as Alexander stood across the narrow street, watching the scene that had shattered everything he thought he knew about his past. Lena was there, laughing softly as she guided the boy's tiny hands across a canvas, their cheeks pressed close together. Every movement between them spoke of love, of familiarity, of a bond forged long before he had ever realized what he had thrown away. And those eyes, those unmistakable green eyes, mirrored his own. For days he returned to that quiet street, always keeping his distance, always watching from the shadows. Each time, the truth settled deeper into his chest until denial was no longer possible. The boy was his. There was no doubt left in his mind. He could see it in the child's smile, in the way he tilted his head when he was curious, even in the stubborn little scowl that formed when something didn't go his way. The boy carried his blood, his features, and perhaps the most devastating part of all, the parts of Alexander he had never been allowed to give. The discovery left him sleepless. Nights stretched into dawns as he paced the length of his penthouse, replaying every fight, every cruel word, every moment that had driven Lena away. If she had been pregnant when she left, she must have faced it alone. The thought burned through him like acid. He had built skyscrapers that touched the clouds, signed deals worth billions, and yet the woman he had loved had carried his child without his knowledge or support. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, his need to know grew unbearable. He needed answers. He needed the truth. And most of all, he needed to see his son up close, to hear the sound of his voice, to know the life he had missed. But approaching Lena directly felt impossible. He had destroyed every bridge between them with his anger, and if he came crashing back into her world now, she might vanish again, taking the boy with her. So he waited. He learned her routines. Every morning she opened the small art studio at 8. By 10, the children arrived. The boy always came with a woman in her 50s, probably a caretaker or a friend, and left in the afternoon. Lena would often stay late, working alone by lamplight long after the streets emptied. Alexander stood across the street more times than he could count, watching her silhouette against the soft glow of the studio windows, wondering if she ever thought of him. Then, one rainy afternoon, fate forced his hand. The boy darted out of the art shop, chasing a paint-streaked paper airplane, laughing as it floated across the street toward Alexander's parked car. Lena shouted after him, but the wind drowned her voice. The little boy stumbled, landing just inches from the curb as a delivery van turned the corner too quickly. Without thinking, Alexander moved. His legs carried him before his mind caught up. He lunged forward, scooping the boy into his arms just as the van roared past, the gust of wind whipping at their clothes. The child clung to his neck, trembling in shock, and when Alexander looked down into those wide, tear-filled eyes, something inside him cracked wide open. Lena was there seconds later, her breath ragged, panic etched into every line of her face. She froze when she saw who was holding her son. For a heartbeat, the world fell silent. No cars, no rain, no distant hum of the town. Just 3 people standing in the middle of a quiet street, bound together by a truth too powerful to deny. "Give him to me," she whispered, her voice shaking. Alexander did, gently, carefully, as if handing over the most fragile thing he'd ever touched. "He's safe," he murmured, his own voice barely more than a breath. Lena clutched the boy to her chest, her eyes never leaving his. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he said, and for once there was no pride, no anger, no armor in his tone. "I needed to see him." Her face paled. "You have no right." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but I think I know the truth now." Silence stretched between them, heavy and trembling. Finally, Lena turned away, walking back toward the studio without another word. But before disappearing through the door, she paused and spoke over her shoulder. "Knowing the truth doesn't mean you deserve it." The words hit harder than any insult ever could. She was right. He had no claim, no right to demand answers, no right to be part of the boy's life. And yet the seed had been planted, unstoppable now. For the first time, Alexander wasn't fighting for control or revenge. He was fighting for a chance, just a chance, to prove that he could be something more than the man who had driven them away. And as the rain poured down and her door closed behind her, one thought consumed him. He had found his son. He had found the family he didn't know he'd lost, and now he would move heaven and earth to earn the right to be part of it. But what he didn't know was that Lena had a second secret, one even more devastating, that could still keep them apart forever. The days after that encounter felt like a storm brewing beneath Alexander's skin. The image of the boy's small hands gripping his shirt and those eyes staring up at him wouldn't leave his mind. It wasn't just resemblance anymore. It was certainty. That boy was his blood, his legacy, his son. And now that he had seen him, touched him, saved him, there was no going back to the hollow existence he had before. But the road ahead was darker than he had imagined. Lena was determined to shut him out, to build a wall so high that no apology or regret could climb it. And Alexander knew this wasn't a battle he could win with money or power. It would take something deeper. It would take patience, humility, and proof that he was no longer the man who once destroyed her trust. He started small. He returned to the town but never approached her directly. He attended the art workshops disguised as a donor, quietly sponsoring programs for children without revealing his name. He volunteered at a local youth center, hoping that word of his involvement would reach her. Weeks passed and every effort felt invisible, but he refused to stop. Every time he saw Lena on the street pushing a stroller or carrying groceries, his heart ached with a longing he couldn't put into words. Then, one afternoon, an unexpected opportunity arrived. Lena's art center was struggling to secure funding for a new community project. The town council was ready to reject the proposal, claiming it lacked financial support. Alexander saw his opening. Without signing his name, he transferred a massive anonymous donation into the foundation's account. The project was approved days later, and for the first time in years, he saw her smile. Not at him, but for something he had made possible. Still, he remained a ghost in her world. She didn't know he was behind the donation. She didn't know he had been quietly watching over their son from afar. And then, fate intervened again, in the form of an invitation. Lena's center was hosting an art exhibition to celebrate the project's launch. She sent invitations to sponsors, unaware that one of them would land on Alexander's desk. He shouldn't have gone. He told himself it was a mistake. But on the night of the event, he found himself standing in the crowded gallery, surrounded by canvases that spoke of hope, resilience, and second chances. And there she was, radiant, composed, speaking to the guests with a quiet strength that stole his breath. Their eyes met across the room, and for a heartbeat, the years between them vanished. But the fragile moment shattered when a man approached Lena, wrapping an arm casually around her waist. Alexander's heart clenched as he watched them laugh together, a picture of effortless intimacy. Jealousy burned in his chest before reason could stop it. Who was he? A friend? A lover? Or the man raising his son? Later that night, he couldn't hold back any longer. He waited until the guests thinned out and approached her as she was locking up. She froze at the sight of him, the warmth in her face replaced by cold restraint. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice steady but guarded. "Because I needed to know," he said, fighting to keep his voice calm. "The boy, is he mine?" The question hung heavy in the air. Lena's hand tightened around her keys, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then she sighed and turned away. "You don't get to ask that," she whispered. "Not after the way you treated me. Lena, please." He stepped closer, his voice breaking. If he is, I want to be part of his life. I want to know him. She turned back to him, anger flashing in her eyes. Part of his life? Where were you when I was sick and alone? Where were you when I couldn't afford the hospital bills? When I held him for the first time and promised him I'd protect him from pain, especially yours? Each word hit harder than the last. He had no defense, no excuse, only regret. I didn't know, he said softly. If I had, you did know, she cut him off. You knew enough to destroy everything we had. You chose anger over trust, and now you want to rewrite the past because you're lonely? The silence between them stretched until it was unbearable. Finally, she shook her head and started walking away. The answer is yes, she said without looking back. He's yours, but you are a stranger to him, and I intend to keep it that way. The words sliced through him, leaving him breathless. She had confirmed what he already knew, but the finality in her voice terrified him. If he didn't act now, he might lose them both forever. Yet as Lena disappeared into the night, another thought crawled into his mind, something she had said without meaning to. She had mentioned hospital bills, struggles, illness. There was a chapter of her life he didn't know, a chapter that might hold more secrets than just the existence of his son. And as much as the truth had already broken him, he had the feeling that the worst and most dangerous part of the story was still to come. The confession should have been a moment of relief, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a door slamming shut. Lena's words echoed in Alexander's mind for nights on end. He's yours, but you are a stranger. He replayed them over and over as if saying them aloud might dull the sting, but they only cut deeper. He had a son, flesh and blood, a living connection to the woman he had loved and lost, and yet he was nothing to him. No bedtime stories, no first steps, no whispered goodnights, just a stranger. The pain was almost unbearable, but beneath it, something else stirred, a resolve stronger than any he had ever felt. He couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future, and that meant uncovering the truths Lena still refused to share. Her mention of hospital bills, of being sick and alone, haunted him more than the revelation of his son. It wasn't just about anger anymore. It was about understanding the life she had built without him, the battles she had fought while he had drowned himself in wealth and pride. He began with what he knew. She had vanished into that small town 5 years ago. During that time, there were no public records of hospital visits under her name, no major medical bills in her accounts. But a deeper investigation revealed something far more disturbing. There had been medical expenses under another name. A woman named Elena Carter had spent 6 months in a specialized care facility shortly after giving birth. The diagnosis was never listed in the public record, but the cost suggested it had been serious, life-threatening. The discovery hit Alexander like a punch to the chest. She had been fighting for her life while carrying his child, and he hadn't even known. The thought kept him awake at night, guilt clawing at his insides. And if that wasn't enough, another piece of the puzzle soon followed, one that twisted the knife end deeper. During that same period, the boy had been hospitalized, too. Complications, a heart condition, surgery, months of treatment. Alexander's son had started his life in pain, and he hadn't been there to hold his hand. One night, unable to bear the weight of it anymore, Alexander returned to the art center. It was late, long after the children had gone home, but the lights were still on. Lena was there, working alone, her hair falling over her shoulders as she painted. She didn't notice him at first, and for a moment he simply watched her, the woman he had once called his future, now a stranger building a life that should have been theirs together. When she finally turned and saw him, her expression hardened. "I told you to stay away." "I know," he said quietly, "but I can't. Not after what I found." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "The hospital, the treatments, the surgery. You were dying, Lena. And our son, he almost didn't make it." Her breath hitched, and for the first time since their reunion, the walls around her seemed to falter. She looked away, gripping the edge of the table as if to steady herself. You had no right to look into that. I had every right, he said, his voice breaking. I was supposed to be there. I should have been the one holding your hand, the one signing those forms, the one pacing the hallway waiting for the doctor. But I wasn't, because I was too angry to believe in us. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. And what difference does it make now? We survived. We don't need you. Maybe you don't, he whispered. But I need you. I need him. And I need to make this right. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument they had ever had. Lena's hands trembled slightly as she set her brush down. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost broken. You think this is about you, Sai? Howling up now and pretending to care? It's not. This is about a little boy who doesn't know who you are. This is about a man who let his rage destroy everything we could have had. And it's about a woman, Alexander said gently, who still hasn't told me everything. She froze, her gaze snapping back to him. What are you talking about? I know there's more, he said. The hospital, the name change, the way you look over your shoulder when you walk home at night. Something else is going on, Lena. Something you haven't told me. Her breath caught, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she turned away, walking toward the window, her shoulders tense. There are things you don't understand, she murmured. Things that could ruin everything. Then help me understand, he pleaded. Please. But she didn't answer. And in that silence, Alexander realized the truth. The story of their broken love wasn't over. The revelation of their son wasn't the final twist. There was another secret buried in Lena's past, one dark enough to terrify even her. And if he wanted to reclaim the family he had lost, he would have to face it, no matter what it was. Outside, a storm was gathering over the quiet coastal town, thunder rolling in the distance. And Alexander knew, with a cold certainty, that the real battle for their future was only beginning. The storm rolled in before dawn, thunder splitting the sky like a warning. Alexander hadn't slept. He sat by the window of his hotel room, watching the rain streak down the glass and replaying Lena's final words in his head. There are things you don't understand, things that could ruin everything. That single sentence kept looping through his mind like a riddle he couldn't solve. What could be so dangerous, so devastating, that even after everything, betrayal, anger, a hidden child, she was still too afraid to speak? He knew Lena wasn't someone who feared easily. She had faced the humiliation of being accused, the pain of raising a child alone, the weight of illness and survival. If something still terrified her, it had to be bigger than anything he had imagined. And now it wasn't just about winning her back or earning his son's trust. It was about finding the truth she was still running from. The answer came unexpectedly a few days later. One of his investigators, a man he had nearly dismissed for lack of progress, called with something strange. Years ago, just after Lena had left him, she had received multiple large deposits into an anonymous account. The sender's name was hidden behind a shell corporation, but the trail eventually led to a name Alexander recognized all too well. Richard Hale, his father, the man who had abandoned him when he was 5. The revelation made no sense. Richard Hale had vanished decades ago, choosing a life of shadows over his son. Why would he send money to Lena? Why would he be involved in her disappearance at all? Unless this wasn't coincidence. Unless Lena had been keeping something far more dangerous than a child from him. Fueled by suspicion, Alexander followed the trail. It led him to a crumbling estate 2 towns away, a property long believed abandoned. And there, to his shock, he found Richard Hale, older, frailer, but unmistakably alive. The reunion was not warm. You shouldn't have come here, Richard rasped, leaning heavily on a cane. There are things you don't understand, son. Then explain them, Alexander demanded. Start with why you paid the woman I loved to disappear. His father sighed, the weight of old sins heavy in his voice. Because staying would have killed her, and it would have destroyed you. The story spilled out slowly, painfully. Years ago, Richard had become entangled with powerful investors, men who weren't just businessmen but criminals laundering money through Alexander's company. When Alexander had begun to unknowingly expose their dealings, they had issued a threat: take him down or take his Emily down. Lena had become the target, and the pregnancy had only made her more vulnerable. Richard had stepped in, using his last connections to hide her and keep her safe. Lena agreed to disappear, Richard said, not because she wanted to leave you, but because she had no choice. She did it to protect your son before he was even born. Alexander's world tilted. All this time he had believed she left out of pride, out of anger. But the truth was far darker. She had sacrificed everything, their love, their life together, to keep their child alive. When he returned to town that night, his chest felt heavy with rage and guilt. Rage for the men who had threatened his family. Guilt for the years he had wasted blaming her. And beneath it all, a growing fear that if those men had targeted Lena once, they might do it again. He found her closing the art center and confronted her gently. I know about my father, he said. I know why you left. Her body stiffened, but she didn't deny it. Then you know why I can't let you in. No, he said firmly. Now I know why I have to be here. Because the danger isn't gone, and I'm not letting anyone take you or our son from me again. Lena's eyes softened, but only for a moment. You don't understand. They still watch us. If they find out you're here, if they realize we're connected again, they'll come back. Then let them, Alexander replied, his voice low and fierce. I've spent years building power to protect what matters, and now I know what matters. I'm not walking away this time. The rain hammered the pavement around them, and in that moment, a silent truce formed between them, fragile, trembling, but real. Yet neither of them knew that miles away, in a dark office in the city, the very men they feared were already watching. Alexander's search for truth had not gone unnoticed, and now that they knew he had discovered the past, they were preparing to make sure history would repeat itself, with blood. The storm outside was only beginning, and so was the war that would decide whether his broken family would ever have a future. The days that followed felt like a fuse burning toward an explosion. Alexander could sense the shift in the air, a tension that clung to every breath and whispered danger even in the quietest moments. Lena had gone silent after their last conversation. She stopped answering his calls, stopped showing up to the art center at predictable times. It was as if she had built an invisible wall between them again. But this time he knew it wasn't anger keeping her away. It was fear. And fear always meant someone was watching. One evening, while leaving a late board meeting in the city, Alexander noticed a black sedan trailing his car. It stayed several cars behind, never too close, never too far. When he turned down unexpected streets, the sedan followed. When he stopped for coffee, it parked across the road. By the third day of this silent chase, he was certain. They knew he was digging into the past, and they were watching every move. Instead of fear, something else rose in him. Resolve. If they thought they could intimidate him into walking away again, they were mistaken. He had lost Lena and his son once because he hadn't known the stakes. He would not make the same mistake twice. The next morning, he made a decision that would change everything. He contacted a private intelligence team, former government operatives who specialized in dismantling criminal networks. Their investigation confirmed his worst suspicion. The same organization that had threatened Lena 5 years ago was still active. They were bigger now, more dangerous, operating through shell companies and offshore accounts, and one of their biggest money streams flowed directly through a construction subsidiary connected to his own corporation. It was a chilling revelation. He had been feeding the very people who had hunted his family. That night, Alexander drove. He back to the small town without telling anyone. The streets were quiet, the lamps casting long shadows as rain began to fall. He parked near Lena's house and waited. Hours passed before she returned, carrying their sleeping son in her arms. She froze when she saw him standing by the porch. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I know," he said softly, "but I have to show you something." She hesitated before stepping inside, and he followed. Once the boy was tucked into bed, Alexander told her everything. The surveillance, the black sedan, the criminal network still tied to his company. He told her about the danger that hadn't disappeared, but had only been hiding in plain sight. Her face drained of color. "This is why I didn't want you involved. This is why I ran. They don't care about money anymore, Alexander. They care about control. If they find out you're fighting them, they'll come after him." "Then let them come," he said, his voice steady but fierce. "I'm done living in fear. They took 5 years of our lives. They stole my chance to be a father. They don't get another second." Lena's eyes glistened as she looked at him. "And what if they kill you? What if they take him anyway?" "Then I'll make sure they fall before they even try," he promised. "But I can't do it without you. I need to know you'll stand with me, that we'll protect him together." Silence filled the room. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows like a ticking clock. Finally, Lena nodded, not with hope, but with the grim acceptance of a woman who had run out of places to hide. The next few weeks became a blur of secret meetings, encrypted communications, and quiet preparations. Alexander's intelligence team dug deeper, uncovering names, locations, and offshore accounts. Lena began installing security systems around her home and the art center. They rehearsed emergency plans, teaching their son what to do if someone tried to take him. The once fractured bond between them slowly began to was forged not by romance this time, but by shared determination to protect the child they both loved. But danger was already closer than they realized. One night, as Alexander reviewed the latest intelligence files, a message appeared on his secure server. It was a single sentence with no signature, no traceable source. "Walk away or bury them both." His blood ran cold. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. And it meant they knew. They knew about Lena, they knew about the boy, and they knew that Alexander Hale, the man who had once destroyed everything with his anger, was now willing to burn the world down to protect the family he had lost. The war he had been preparing for was no longer in the shadows. It had begun, and this time the price of failure would not be heartbreak, it would be blood. The night the message arrived, Alexander didn't sleep. He sat in the dark of his study with the glow of the screen still burning into his eyes, replaying the words over and over. Walk away or bury them both. It was a warning, but it was also a declaration. Whoever they were no longer just watching. They were preparing to strike. By morning, the fear had hardened into something colder, sharper. He knew there was no going back. The line between business and war had vanished. And now, every move he made had to be calculated, every step measured. One mistake, and Lena and their son would pay the price. He doubled the security around the art center and her home. Discreet guards followed their son to school. Cameras watched every corner of the street. Lena hated it. "I don't want him growing up surrounded by fear," she told him. But Alexander only replied, "I'd rather he grow up scared than not grow up at all." Still, the walls around them were closing in. A black SUV was spotted parked across the street for 3 nights in a row. A man Lena had never seen before. Ree showed up at her exhibition pretending to be a buyer but asked too many personal questions. Even their son's school reported suspicious phone calls asking about pickup times. It was a silent siege, one that tightened like a noose. The final push came one rainy afternoon when Alexander received a call that turned his blood to ice. The school had been evacuated after an anonymous threat. No one was hurt, but their son was missing. The world tilted. Panic roared through him like fire. He and Lena raced through the storm to the police station, but there were no answers. No ransom demand, no message, No clue. Just a single security camera image of a man in a maintenance uniform leading their boy out of a side door. Lena's scream when she saw the image would haunt Alexander for the rest of his life. "You promised," she sobbed, her fists pounding his chest. "You promised you'd keep him safe." "I will," he whispered, though his own heart was breaking. "I will bring him back." The hours that followed were a blur of chaos. Police searched every road, every security feed, every witness. But Alexander didn't wait for them. He activated every contact, every connection, every shadowy resource at his disposal. His enemies wanted a war, and now they had one. By midnight, a lead surfaced. A warehouse on the outskirts of the city, abandoned but with signs of recent activity. The police advised him to wait for a tactical team. He refused. "Every minute I wait is a minute they could hurt him," he growled. He went alone. The warehouse smelled of oil and rust, the silence broken only by the distant hum of rain on the tin roof. He moved cautiously, every sense sharpened, every breath measured. And then he heard it. A small, terrified whimper echoing from somewhere deep inside. "Daddy!" The words sliced through the darkness like a blade. He followed the sound, heart pounding, until he reached a room at the back of the building. And there he saw him, tied to a chair, trembling, a blindfold over his eyes. But before Alexander could reach him, a figure stepped out of the shadows, a gun glinting under the flickering light. "I told you to walk away," the man said calmly. "Now you'll watch everything you love disappear." Alexander didn't move. His eyes never left his son. "Take me," he said. "Kill me, but let him go." The man laughed. "Oh, we will, but not yet. First, you're going to do exactly what we say, or we'll make sure the boy never sees another sunrise." It was the moment everything changed. This wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about revenge or power. It was about control. They didn't just want to punish Alexander. They wanted to own him. And as the gun pressed against his ribs, he knew he was facing a choice that would define the rest of his life. Surrender and lose everything he believed in. Or fight and risk losing the only thing that mattered. And somewhere, deep in the darkness, another secret waited to explode. Because unknown to Alexander, Lena wasn't at home weeping. She was already on her way, armed with a truth that could either save their son or destroy them all. The past she had tried to bury was about to rise, and when it did, nothing, not love, not loyalty, not even blood, would ever be the same again. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days, as if the sky itself knew that something terrible was coming. Alexander stood outside the warehouse with his heart hammering so hard it felt like it might tear through his chest. Inside was everything that mattered to him. His son was somewhere in that darkness, and the woman he had once driven away was walking straight into it. He had told Lena to stay back, but she didn't listen. She never listened when it came to protecting the people she loved. Lena moved through the night like a shadow, her soaked jacket clinging to her frame and her mind locked on one mission. She had spent years keeping a part of her past buried, but now that secret was the only weapon she had left. As she approached the warehouse door, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small worn photograph. In it was a younger version of herself standing beside a man with the same cold eyes as the one who had taken her son, the man she had once called brother. His name was Adrian Novak, and he had vanished from her life 10 years ago after a string of crimes and betrayals that left scars deeper than blood. Lena had never spoken of him, not even to Alexander, because some wounds were too dangerous to share. But Adrian had found her again, and this time he was using the one thing she loved most to settle a debt she never knew she owed. Inside the warehouse, Alexander was forced to his knees, his wrists bound and his son crying softly a few feet away. Adrian paced in front of him with a predator's patience, watching the billionaire who had once seemed untouchable, now broken and desperate. "You built your empire on other people's pain. Adrian said with a voice that was far too calm. "Now you'll understand what that feels like." "What do you want?" Alexander asked, though he already knew the answer. "Not money?" Adrian sneered. "I want obedience. You'll transfer ownership of Hale Industries to a trust I control. You'll publicly confess to financial crimes you didn't commit, and you'll disappear. If you don't, your son doesn't leave this room." The door creaked open before Alexander could respond. Lena stepped inside, her eyes locked on Adrian with a hatred that had been building for a decade. "Hello, Adrian," she said, and the man froze. For the first time, his mask of control slipped. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he muttered. "This ends now," she replied. "Stay out of this, Lena," Alexander hissed, but she shook her head. "This isn't your war, Alexander, it's mine." The room shifted. The balance of power changed. Adrian had expected a terrified mother, not the woman who once dismantled his criminal network from the inside. "You think you can stop me?" He laughed, but there was a tremor in his voice now. "I already have," Lena said quietly. It was then that Adrian heard it, the faint hum of engines outside the warehouse, the distant crackle of radio chatter. She had called in federal agents 30 minutes earlier using a code phrase known only to one group, the people who had once helped her disappear from her brother's shadow. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Adrian grabbed the boy, pulling him close, his gun trembling in his hand. "If they come in, I swear I'll shoot," he shouted. Lena took a slow step forward, her voice calm and steady. "If you hurt him, you'll never leave this place alive. You know who's out there, Adrian. They're not here for justice. They're here for you." For the first time since this nightmare began, the monster looked afraid. The building was surrounded. Snipers had sights trained on the windows. Tactical teams moved into position. But none of that mattered as much as the truth hanging between the siblings. "This was never about Alexander," Lena said. "This was about you and me and the past we both tried to escape." Adrian's hand shook. The boy whimpered. And in that breathless moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Alexander shifted his weight slowly, deliberately preparing for the one chance he might get to save his son. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as memories of a broken childhood and a violent brother collided with the reality of the man she loved on his knees. Everything was about to explode, and they all knew it. The storm outside intensified, lightning splitting the sky as sirens screamed closer. Adrian's grip tightened on the boy, and Lena's next words would decide whether they walked out alive or never walked out at all. "Put the gun down," she said, "and let me finish what you started all those years ago." The next seconds would define everything. Love, redemption, betrayal, and blie would collide in a single heartbeat. And the secret Lena had buried for so long was about to become the weapon that decided who lived and who didn't. The storm outside raged like it was tearing the world apart, and inside the warehouse time itself seemed to stop. Adrian's finger hovered over the trigger, his hand trembling as he dragged Lena and Alexander's son closer. Lena's breath came slow and deliberate, her mind racing through every possibility, every move that could end with her child alive. Alexander remained on his knees, his eyes locked on the boy he would die to protect. "Do you remember the night we ran from the police?" Lena said, suddenly breaking the silence with a calm voice that cut through the chaos. Adrian's eyes flickered confused. "You were 16 and I was 13. You told me we'd be safe if we stuck together. You said family always protects each other." "Don't do this, Lena," Adrian growled, but his grip loosened slightly. "You swore you'd never hurt me." She continued, her voice trembling now with both fear and strength. "And yet here you are, threatening the only piece of family I have left." For a brief moment, the monster behind Adrian's eyes faltered, and the boy saw it too. "Mom," he whispered, reaching toward her. That single word shattered whatever armor Adrian had left. He hesitated, and in that heartbeat, Alexander moved. It wasn't a reckless lunge, but a calculated strike. He slammed his shoulder into Adrian's side, sending the gun spinning across the concrete floor. The boy screamed. Lena ran forward and chaos exploded into motion. Adrian roared and swung a heavy fist, catching Alexander across the jaw, but years of rage had transformed the billionaire into something harder than his polished exterior. He fought back with desperate fury, every punch fueled by months of guilt and the unbearable thought of losing the family he'd almost destroyed. Lena grabbed her son and shielded him behind a stack of crates as sirens screeched outside and tactical teams closed in. Adrian slammed Alexander against Tiaz. He walled, both men gasping for breath, soaked in sweat and rain and hatred. "You think you can take everything from me?" Adrian spat. "First her, then my life?" "You took everything from yourself," Alexander rasped. "You let hate define you. You let greed destroy you. I'm done living like that." The door burst open with a crash as armed agents stormed in, shouting commands. Adrian swung toward them, wild and desperate, but before he could reach the weapon, a red laser dot found his chest. One final warning echoed through the warehouse, and then it was over. He dropped to his knees, hands raised, the fight drained from his body as agents swarmed him and dragged him into custody. Lena collapsed to the ground, holding her son so tightly he could barely breathe. Alexander stumbled toward them, bruised, bleeding, and shaking, but alive. He knelt beside them, and for the first time in years there were no words left to say. He just held them and let the tears fall. Weeks passed before the chaos finally settled. Adrian faced charges that would keep him behind bars for decades. The media storm faded and the world moved on. But for Alexander and Lena, everything had changed. The boy slept safely at night now, though he clung to his mother's hand a little tighter. And Alexander had stopped chasing boardroom victories and started showing up for the moments that actually mattered. He went to school recitals and art shows and doctor appointments. He cooked breakfast on Sundays, even when he burned it. And every night he told Lena he was grateful she had let him stay in their lives, even when he didn't deserve it. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Alexander stood in the backyard of the small house they had chosen together, watching their son chase fireflies. Lena joined him, her hand brushing his as naturally as breathing. "You still blame yourself," she said softly. "I always will," he replied. "I let anger destroy everything once. I don't ever want to do it again." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the last golden light of the day. "You're not the man who let me go anymore. You're the man who fought to come back." "I'll spend the rest of my life proving that," he whispered. "Then stop proving," she said. "Just be here." He kissed her, then a slow, careful kiss that tasted like forgiveness and second chances. And for the first time since the night he'd accused her of betrayal, Alexander felt something he'd never thought possible. Peace. The secret that had once torn them apart had brought them back together. It wasn't just the truth about Adrian or the past they shared. It was the child they had created, the family they had built, and the love they had rediscovered in the ashes of everything they had lost. In the months that followed, their lives became simpler but deeper. They built a foundation not on power or pride, but on trust and respect. The boy grew stronger and bolder each day, a living reminder of the love that had survived betrayal and fear. And Alexander Hale, the man who once believed he could control everything, learned that the most powerful thing he could ever do was surrender to love. The world still saw him as a billionaire visionary and master strategist, but Lena and their son knew the truth. He was a man who had fallen hard and learned how to rise again. A man who had once let the woman he loved walk away in anger but found his way back when he discovered the only secret that mattered. That love wasn't about control or victory. It was about forgiveness, sacrifice, and the courage to build something real even after everything had been broken.